excuse me, Your Worship, you're live.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Didn't mean to call you Chris. I never know who's behind the curtain on any given day. All right, Council, it's 2 p.m. and I will call the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee meeting to order. Today, we acknowledge that Collingwood is located on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Lake Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. And I will look for a motion to adopt the agenda, and the motion reads as follows: that the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for June 7, 2021 be adopted as amended. There are two additional items. Report added 5.1, Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, and consent agenda item 6.1, South Georgian Bay Shelter Feasibility Study. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Madigan and Councillor McLeod. And I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest today, Council? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that position as we move forward, please let me know. And that brings us to item 4, which is interim control bylaw updates. And just before we move into that, I want to welcome and introduce Ron Glenn, who has been hired as our interim planning director. He has a long and impressive resume with over 35 years of planning experience at the municipal, regional, and provincial levels. He's a registered professional planner and has served as the chair of the Regional Planning Commission of Ontario. For 9 years, leading up to 2018, he was the Director of Planning Services and the Chief Planning Official for Halton Region. Prior to that, he worked at the Ministries of Public Infrastructure, Renewal, and Municipal Affairs and Housing as the Director of Growth Policy, Planning and Analysis, and the province's Manager of Planning Policy. He also worked for a number of years as a senior planner in Grey County. So this is in an area he knows well. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you very much, Your Worship.
And with that, we have item 4.1, which is update on water capacity. Director Slama, please.
Actually, Your Worship, I'll do the introduction, and
Okay.
then I'm going to ask Director Slama to address a couple of specific technical points, and then I will continue. I thought perhaps with Mr. Glenn in his first day, maybe I would do the planning update for today, and we'll put him on the hotter seat next week.
Okay, thank you, CAO. Go ahead.
All right, as per the request from Council, and you can go to the second slide, please. And this is just a summary of the resolution from Council, is that each meeting we will update you on this very high priority. And we've included in this update all the items that were specified. So on slide 3, for those of you who are not aware, the situation that we're updating everybody on is about the water supply. The current water supply is safe and available. And as soon as they were made aware of this difficult situation, as Council knows, and as the public may be aware, Council took a really proactive and transparent approach to seek further capacity and manage the capacity that's remaining. It's an exceptionally high priority, and Council have asked staff to act on several fronts at the highest levels of the organization to seek a solution. So with the chlorine maximized to the amount that we technically are able to at this time, we have several years of growth available, but not enough to get comfortably at the current rate to the 2025 plant expansion. So that plant is the water treatment plant. And so we've used a tool called an interim control bylaw, but what it does is it temporarily and transparently pauses most development. So as we allocate or figure out how to move forward in this constrained situation, we must grow as a complete community. So this is to figure out how to do that. So we're starting a land use policy study. We are accelerating construction of the new plant and seeking interim solutions to produce more water in the meanwhile. And we are also seeking water from other municipalities. So what that means is water we've sold in bulk to other municipalities, coming back in part to supply our own municipality. And we just wanted to make it clear to residents or people in the community that work that doesn't use more water, such as most residential renovations and additions, can continue. You can check with the building department on if you need anything, if this will affect you, if you have a project underway. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Director Slama for most of the water capacity update, please.
Next slide, please. So following our staff report last week, PW 2021-11, which covered the potential for advancing construction of the UV disinfection at the existing water treatment plant, and the resulting council direction for the current RFP to include wording specific to this opportunity, the final addendum issued for the RFP included the requirement for proponents to complete an analysis on options for the advancement of disinfection, including delivery dates, costs, and any risks that should be considered with each option. So we've just shown you here the wording that we included in the RFP and the expectation from the respondents. Regarding the third-party review of the chlorine addition, staff are working to reach out to consultants. We are reaching out to consultants that are independent from those that we know are interested in bidding for the RFP. So we're continuing with those discussions and just getting scopes and prices and procuring that work. We do have a meeting scheduled that's related to the water supply agreement. Our meeting with New Tecumseth later this week is to review the water supply rate calculation, which is a critical component of the future water supply agreement that we're currently negotiating. And I think CAO Skinner wanted to speak about some discussion that she had with the CAOs.
Sonia?
Thank you, Director Slama and Your Worship. I did have a chance to speak with the CAO at New Tecumseth and have been trading communication with the CAO at the town of Blue Mountain since our meeting on Thursday afternoon last week. So we've been pressing forward to see whether or not they will be able to provide water back to the town. I'm going to press further to get a response on that in the short term and to report back to council by the July date specified, the 19th. But I do think we're going to have to bear down and a little harder to get those responses back. And so we can figure out if, in fact, we can include those responses in the water allocations of council may do in July as exemptions to the ICBL. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is just our flow chart of the steps towards that we're working to complete towards our water treatment plant expansion. So although we're working on a lot of components in the background, we're still at the final, the bottom box there. And next week, at least, we will be able to report that the RFP has closed. Next slide, please. This slide just covers the funding requirements for the plant expansion, which I did speak to last week, and I believe Treasurer Quinlan is also here if there is any further questions on that. Next slide, please. So today we've provided a chart which summarizes both the building permit status information that we received from CBO Miller last week, which was updated to May 27th. And at the bottom, we've included our SDU status. So if we look at those bottom numbers, we see when in the information we've provided council and the public previously, our available SDUs in the winter is 1,091 and in the summer 1,948. When we look at the committed SDUs related to the building permits in the upper part of the chart that have already been issued for this year, that totals 119 SDUs. And then the committed SDUs since April 26th include 2 that are related to the building permits that were issued before that date, or sorry, applied for before that date, and the 107 that were included in the exemptions considered last week. So our remaining SDUs are 863 in the winter and 1,773 in the summer. Next slide, please. So Your Worship, if there is any questions on that first part of the presentation.
Thank you, Peggy. Council, any questions on the update so far? You just scroll down. Well, thank you. I'm not seeing any, but seeing as this is an SIC meeting, I'm wondering, Clerk Almus, if we should be asking if there's anyone in the audience who would have a question.
Certainly, Your Worship. We do have Matthew Pretty wishing to address council, or I should say committee.
Okay. Mr. Pretty, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a hot, warm day here in South Georgian Bay, and I'm just tuning in here. There's a few things on today's agenda of importance. Definitely the water use. It's important for, to understand both industrially, commercially, residentially, there's different uses, but I'm just wondering, these capacity issues, are we able to receive more funding from the province and the federal government to secure, an increase in the facilities? Is that what's required here? Do we need an increase in those facilities to help manage, obviously, future development as that restriction has been made with high rises and subdivisions? What are we looking at, and what do we need exactly to make this work? Thank you.
Okay, we're looking at a cost-sharing arrangement with the town of New Tecumseh, and I'll look to Director Slama to answer that question, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So for the water treatment plant expansion in particular, yes, it's we have had it on our capital project plan within our 10-year capital project plan for a while, and we will be entering an agreement of funding, a cost-sharing agreement with New Tecumseh to secure this. Staff are always looking at the opportunities to funding opportunities that might be applicable with our project, and we'll continue to do so. But at this point in time, we feel that we're fairly secure in our ability to fund our portion of the expansion.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That helps to clarify. Have a nice day.
Sarah, is there anyone else in the audience?
Certainly, Your Worship. So to all of the individuals in our gallery, should anybody wish to speak to the committee at this point, please press the raise your hand feature. If you're on a phone, press *9. And there's no further questions regarding that component of the updates, Your Worship.
Thank you, Sarah. And Council, I did not see any questions. If there are any questions, though, now's your opportunity. And that will take us then to item 5, deputations, and we do have one today. 5.
Sorry, Your Worship.
Yes.
There is 3 more slides to this update.
Oh, my apologies.
As it's Mr. Director Glenn's Interim Director Glenn's first day, I'll cover these for this update. Next slide, please. So on the planning side, since the last update, we did have a question and answer session with the local Southern Georgian Bay and Muskoka Realtors group. And that included both the water supply and the interim control bylaw, and how realtors can find information for their clients and help them to understand what's happening in the community. So the deputy mayor and the mayor participated in that session as well. We did select our preferred planning consultant for the land use planning study. Director Glenn and I completed that work this morning. And we're proceeding with informing the candidates and the contract confirmation and award. So that hasn't been finalized, but we're moving at as fast as possible to get that work started and completed. And we do think that it will position the town better than we'd been positioned previously to make great decisions for the town of Collingwood. It's just unfortunate that the timing and the approach wouldn't have been ideal. The staff report that council dealt with last Thursday came forward, and council has, as you know, endorsed the initial exemptions and our process for going forward. And with the support from the clerk's office and our communications group, Krista Carter, we are seeking a formal exemption request from anyone else who would like to move forward with development during the term of the ICBL. So that's really the people who are looking to proceed between now and next April that we're most interested in hearing from. And if you think that you have well, a large development for sure, but even an accessory apartment, for example, or work on an infill lot, you should submit an application. They're very straightforward. They're available on the town's website. And there is a deadline on June 18th for those to be submitted, and will be considered by staff and provided recommendations to council. I do want to express appreciation to the development community. A number of folks had written us letters previously about their desires for exemptions and why. And though we did put a formal process in place because we wanted to make sure that we had a consistent set of answers on the questions that around why each development was important and needed to move forward now. Sorry, we had that from some developers. We didn't have it from all of them. So appreciation for those of you who are resubmitting. And also we did get a submission quite recently from the Georgian Triangle Development Institute on their thoughts on some of the criteria that we will share further. Next slide, please. And I wasn't quite sure where to put this in the presentation, but I didn't want to miss it. Council at the last meeting asked, and I'm paraphrasing here, whether the interim control bylaw or its schedule should be amended such that some things are automatically excluded as a group, or if they should remain upon request as an exemption. And the buildings and type are whether existing buildings or floor space that already has water and or wastewater allocation. It doesn't require an increase in the amount of water or wastewater servicing should have to apply, or if they should be included as a group. And there's a number of detailed considerations in that question that staff are actively pursuing with planning, the public works, and also with our legal team, so that we'll be able to report back a recommendation to council, either in open session or in camera, depending on the legal advice we receive. Thank you. I believe it's been confirmed. I don't want to go in advance, but I think that there is a special meeting of council that will be confirmed on Friday morning of this week. The agenda is yet to be posted in such that we can deal with that question prior to the June 18th deadline for submissions for exemptions. And I think that is is there another slide? Oh, yes. And so this is just a very simple progress graphic. We will update this graphic with the actual steps and details once we have the land use planning study consultant on board, hopefully for the next update, but we'll need to confirm that because the details of the next steps are dependent on the consultant's proposal. But right now we're in the final throes of selecting the consultant, and we are about to aggressively move into carrying out the study, including the public consultation. Next slide, please. And that's it.
Thank you, CEO Skinner. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to comment on that part of the presentation?
Yes, sir. As your worship, we have Patrick Harrington would like to address committee.
Mr. Harrington, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Your Worship, and to the members of Council. My name is Patrick Harrington. I'm a partner with Ayrton Burles. I'd like to speak today on behalf of Crest Point Real Estate Blue Mountain, Inc., who is the owner of the existing commercial plaza at 2 Old Mountain Road, which is the Blue Mountain Center. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. I'm following up on the discussion that happened at the last special council meeting that was led by Councillor Hamlin with respect to the need for a general amendment to the ICBL, which was touched upon on the last slide, hence the need for my comments today, and give you a little bit of context about why this is coming forward as a request for a general amendment as opposed to one for a site-specific amendment. So the current ICBL prevents any land use, buildings, or structures being used for any purpose whatsoever, except for a use that lawfully existed on the date the bylaw was passed, which is on April 26th of this year. There are 2 limited exceptions currently in the bylaw. One allows for the construction, alteration, or expansion of a deck, patio, fence, porch, accessory building or structure, temporary buildings and structures, and interior renovations to an existing building. But then the second portion of that same exemption says you can have a permit for the repair, rebuild, or restoration of existing building or structure or part thereof, provided that the building or structure continues to be used for the same purpose and in the same manner as it was used on the date of the passing of the bylaw. So the idea behind the ICBL is to freeze the uses as of the date of the bylaw's passage and not allow for new uses unless there's a site-specific exemption. Where my client is getting caught is that they are in for an application for a rezoning. The rezoning is to add a new use to the Blue Mountain Center. There's an existing restaurant in an existing building, and the proposal is to have a new pet store move into the building instead. The new use would use less water, requires less water fixtures, and of course, Blue Mountain Center has been paying its water taxes and paid its DC when the center was originally built out. However, we've been informed by staff as in the process of the application that the ICBL prevents the application from going forward because what's happening at the Blue Mountain Center today is effectively frozen in place unless there's a site-specific exemption granted for a new use. And what this does not only to the Blue Mountain Center, but throughout the town, is that any owner of space within the town is effectively frozen in their current uses unless they get a site-specific exemption, which I don't believe was the town's intention in passing the ICBL in situations where the new use is not going to use more than the existing water allocation, which was the purpose behind the general request for an exemption that was put forward last week, which is a general exemption recognizes that if you've got a new proposed use and you need a permit or you need a zoning bylaw amendment to implement that use, and that use is not going to use any more water than you're using today, then that should be a general exemption to the bylaw as opposed to coming forward for site-specific exemptions. And the reason this becomes important is because there are going to be many landowners out there who in the next year may come into contact with new tenants or may lose existing tenants because of the pandemic or otherwise, who are not going to have the opportunity to come forward in by June 18th and suggest to you the type of exemption they're going to need. They're going to want to swap tenants out during the lifetime of this ICBL, and there should be an exemption added to the ICBL to allow that to happen. Otherwise, you get a situation like my client is in, where you're fixed in place until the ICBL is either lifted or site-specific exemption is granted, which means somebody's going to have to keep coming forward again and again in the future. You're going to be dealing with these types of requests. So my request on behalf of the client, consistent with what Councillor Hamlin had put forward last week, is that staff consider bringing forward a general exemption to allow these circumstances to be addressed on a go-forward basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Councillor, are there any questions or comments for Mr. Harrington? Seeing none, we have your submission. Thank you.
And at this point, Your Worship, there is no further interest to speak to the committee on this matter.
Okay. Council, were there any questions or comments on the second part of the presentation? Seeing none, then we will move on to item 5.1, which is a deputation on the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. And we have Karie Warnar on behalf of Avail Consulting. Sarah, can you please let Ms. Warnar in?
Certainly, Your Worship.
Good afternoon. I apologize. I cut out right when I was admitted into from the attendees, so I apologize. I missed the last little bit. What you said.
Yeah, no, well, good afternoon, Ms. Warnar, and we welcome you to speak to us about the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, and the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council members. We can advance to the next slide. Thank you. So in the next few minutes, we'll be looking at why we're doing this planning and who the partners are involved in this planning, the process to date, as well as the proposed process moving forward, the areas of risk identified across the county, and then those local to your community safety and wellbeing plan, and then what the proposed next steps are. Next slide, please. So there's really two pieces as to why we're doing this. There's the mandate under Bill 175. Municipal councils are required to prepare, adopt, and post a plan on or before July 1st, 2021. And then there's why it makes sense. So our police partners could probably better speak to this, but we know that often police find themselves responding to calls that are complex but not criminal in nature with no chargeable offenses. And just because our police partners are available 24 hours a day doesn't mean they're necessarily the most appropriate partners to be responding to many of these calls. So if done well, community safety and wellbeing planning will unite partners on intersectoral strategies that address social development priorities. So really what we're doing is we're going to focus on root cause from an upstream approach. And if you look on the screen and you see that bullseye target, the outer green ring is social development. And the thought is if we put our attention there and focus our efforts and strategies there, then we're going to shrink those other rings, and that's what we want. Next slide, please. This slide is really just highlighting that diversity, equity, inclusion, and especially involving those with lived experience underpins how we will approach the planning and the implementation of the strategies in the plan. Next slide, please. So this is looking at who your planning partners are, and in the lighter gray box, that's looking at the proposed membership or the membership as it stands now. And in the darker gray, it's really looking at their roles and responsibilities. So if we move from left to right, you have the GMCC, and that group has been in place since the beginning of this planning a year and a half or so ago, and they will remain in place in phase 2. And then in phase 2, we see the local table forming as well as the steering committee forming. And so that local table will really lead the local implementation of the plan. And the steering committee, I don't want to mislead anyone. It is a kind of a county-wide steering committee, and there will be one representative from each of the planning areas. There are 5 planning areas in the county right now, with the exception of Barrie. So Barrie chose to plan independently, but in addition to Barrie, there's 5 other planning groups. South Georgian Bay and Springwater is one group. And so there will be representation from each of the 5 planning groups. And really, that role of the steering committee is to have strategic oversight around some of the administrative pieces that make sense to have standardized, but the governance and the kind of the final word will always remain with the GMCC of each local plan. And then you have your advisory body, and those are your subject matter experts that are in the community now, often the CEOs of many of these organizations sitting at the other planning tables that have been in existence around this work. And they will continue to provide subject matter expertise and guidance. And then we see on the far right, we have other planning tables. And we know that in your community, you have some very strong, vibrant planning tables. And I had the privilege of presenting to them and engaging them on this work leading up until this point. And so we want to make sure that we align with the work that's underway on those tables. And I think of the OAT, the Ontario Health Team, is one of them, and the round table is another, and we know that you have more. Next slide, please. So what is the role of municipalities in this planning? Well, we know in phase 1, the role was really to prepare and adopt and post your plan should you wish to do so. Phase 2, if you look at 1 through 5, it's really speaking to working as equal partners with some of those other community partners that I mentioned, police, health, community, social services, to support the implementation of the strategies identified in your plan. Next slide, please. So how we approached phase 1, so it was very certainly informed, it was evidence-based and informed by data. And then what we did from there, and there's a very comprehensive write-up in the plan about that process, a very detailed kind of outline of that. And then from there, we wanted to make sure we got it right. So we did a very comprehensive quite extensive stakeholder engagement and consultation. It says over 95 key informed interviews. I think I was over 100 by the time I was really done, and multiple presentations and with feedback opportunities at those presentations. And then we did a community survey, and that ran between mid-February and mid-March of this year. And it was really highlighting the areas of risk and getting feedback on residents' thoughts and ideas around how we move forward. And so those were really important to have before we started really kind of nailing down kind of the nitty-gritty of the strategies. The next slide, please. So these are the 8 areas of risk identified across the county. We know that we could probably take those 8 areas of risk and say that every community could work on all 8, but we had to prioritize. So each of the planning groups identified between 3 and 4 areas of risk that they wanted to focus on. And interesting, but probably not surprising, all 5 planning groups identified mental health and addictions as something that was of significant interest and a priority for their community. So moving forward, is probably mental health and addictions is a good place to start, just so that we can kind of get our footing with the process. And we know that we have very supportive and collaborative partners that will support our communities as we start digging into this work in phase 2. Next slide, please. So what is your plan focusing on? So as I mentioned, mental health and addictions, housing, and access to services. In the next couple slides, I'm just going to poke in. I'm just going to lift a few things off the slides to highlight. But again, it's more comprehensive in the plan. So next slide, please. So around mental health and addictions, we're really looking at improving equity, access, and quality of mental health and addiction services for all of our residents across the continuum. And we're going to definitely want to align with the Roadmap to Wellness, which is the provincial strategy around mental health and addictions. Some of the other things you might note there on the slide is looking at increasing our knowledge, skills, and understanding around and capacity around harm reduction and trauma-informed approaches to care. Also looking at building capacity for people to self-manage their own mental well-being. And then another thing that kind of came through, you know, is interesting how when I started the conversations, employer mental health strategies and wellness really started to take shape, especially around small businesses that might not have those resources already in place. And so we certainly see an opportunity for support there. And then the last one is a measurement metric. Next slide, please. So around housing, we know that there is a 10-year affordable housing strategy that is in place, and we certainly want to work to support that. Some of the things that lift off the page there is looking at housing stabilization. So we know that it's one thing to connect people to housing, but we know it's another thing to have people successfully stay housed. And we're certainly seeing evidence of this in our communities now. And so that's looking at a framework that to look at what are the enablers to have people successfully stay housed. And then you'll also see increasing our capacity to best utilize tools we have at our disposal, maybe planning use tools, and also making sure that we align with any local, provincial, or federal initiatives around homelessness and strategies of that. Next slide, please. Access to services. This is, you know, I certainly can't have favorites, they're all important, but I think this is where so much opportunity lies. And looking at some of the research and doing some investigative work beforehand, there really isn't a lot of, you know, action that stands out, even across Canada, where people have really dug into this. And so I see a real potential here. And so what we're going to be looking at is the 4 domains of access, and you can see those listed there. Again, the plan goes into more detail, but what we're going to do is with those 4 areas of access, availability, accessibility, accommodation, acceptability, breaking those down even farther, creating a framework, and then being able to go and overlay that on organizations to see how we measure up and where the opportunities are. And that will give us our next steps as to how we prioritize our work. Next slide, please. So colorful slide, but it kind of gives you like the bird's eye view of, you know, the phase 2 structure and where everybody fits in. So we can see if we look on the left there, South Georgian Bay and Springwater, you can see that GMCC, that local governance table remains intact. The bigger circle with all the colors, those are reflective of your areas of risk. And it's also a great way to see who else is working on that. And then that darker circle is your local person that will sit at the steering committee, and then the advisory body that will support all 5. Next slide, please. So these are just examples of some local planning tables that already exist that are focused on these areas of risk that are already intersectoral in nature. And we want to make sure that we leverage the work that they're doing and make sure that our work aligns with theirs. Next slide, please. So how do you measure this? You know, we know that these are complex social issues. And so The solutions are not linear. There's not one clear path. There's a lot of dependencies. And we also know that no municipality, group, organization, or person can be held responsible exclusively for community level well-being. But what we do know is that if we work together collaboratively across sectors through coordinated strategies, that's planning together, communicating together, sharing together, and measuring together, then we can move the needle in the positive. And so the goal with these strategies in the end, once implemented, is that it will have a positive contributory, rather than a causal relationship with community level safety and well-being. Next slide, please. So immediate next steps, again, should you choose to adopt and then post your plan on or before July 1st. And then shortly after that, working with the community and the community partners to form that local table. And then shortly after that table forms, to identify somebody from that table that will represent the group on that presentation. Next slide, please. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Warnar. Council, are there questions or comments on the report? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Worship. This question is through you to Ms. Warnar. The South Georgian Bay normally also includes the town of the Blue Mountains, which of course is in another county. But many of the issues that we face from a social services standpoint and social phenomena are tied in very closely to those of town of the Blue Mountains. So has there been any consideration to this dynamic that's kind of specific to our area? Is Grey County undertaking a similar study right now? Is there an opportunity for us to incorporate issues that are common to both of our municipalities into our strategy? Because in the end, it's going to affect the same people.
Ms. Warnar?
That's for your worship too, Councillor Doherty. Thank you. That's a great question. And the answer is yes. So we have been in conversation back, well, actually throughout the whole process, I've been working with the consultant who worked on the Grey Bruce plan, recognizing that the town of Blue Mountains consumes and participates and engages in Collingwood. And so that's where they will go naturally for a lot of their services. And so in looking at that, I guess maybe there's some comfort in knowing that many of the areas of risk that were identified with their plan and with our plan are consistent. And we do have a commitment moving forward that I believe even went through Police Services Board for discussion around as we move forward with the implementation and what this next phase looks like. And they have a phase 2 to their work as well, that we will stay connected because we recognize that we will be servicing where those residents are very much a part of your community. So there has been conversation and there is a plan to make that connection and stay current with each other's work to best support that.
Thank you, and that is correct. The Police Services Board, one of the reasons in the motion we passed the other day was to keep the separate Police Services Board for the detachment because of the county there and the two different detachments. And we'll look to Chair Jeffrey to see if she has anything to add about that. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunders. And yes, just to confirm Ms. Warner's comments that our Police Services Board did meet jointly, specifically actually several times with respect to the plan, and Town of Blue Mountains were very keen, as we were conversely, to make sure that we were carrying the same message to each of our respective plans, and that border wasn't impeding our ability to do good work. So I agree.
Thank you, Councillor. Any follow-up, Councillor Doherty?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm just wondering, because the local table will incorporate issues that will at times go above and beyond what are normally expected to be the purview of Police Services Board. Is there any wisdom to including a representative from the town of the Blue Mountains on our local board, that is the South Georgian Bay local board, and alternatively, or sorry, in addition, complementary, that we would have a member from our board represented on the Grey County Town of the Blue Mountains equivalent?
Ms. Warnar?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to clarify, are you speaking about having representation on the Police Services Board or on the local Community Safety and Wellbeing table?
No, on our local Community Safety and Wellbeing Board, because the issues go beyond what are the purview of the Police Services Board.
Yes, we did talk about that, and I believe there's some language in a statement that was drafted. I believe, and I would have to clarify this, and I can clarify and respond to council, that they would have no voting rights per se. I'm not sure if that was the language. I don't want to mislead anyone. I'd have to look at the language, but it was really around having representation so they could speak to their perspective, but it's really around consensus building. I mean, I'm not quite sure what that phase 2 looks like around terms of reference and how decisions are made at that local table. That will be for phase 2 to kind of work through. But there was conversation about having someone, whether it be an organization or someone with lived experience, at that table, and then conversely at the other table as well.
Yeah, good. That's great. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Council, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, because we have a resolution, I am going to open it up to the public before we put the resolution on the floor. Sarah, is there anyone in the public that would like to speak to this item?
Certainly, Your Worship. All those interested in speaking to this matter to our standing committee, please press raise your hand feature. We do have Matthew Purdy wishing to address the committee on this matter.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you please let Mr. Purdy in?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, for allowing me to comment. I thought this was to do with the out of the cold shelter, but it's not. I just did some Googling here. This is a Solicitor General gotta go to the quiet room here. Okay, guys, so this is a big deal. What we need to advocate is people maintaining their privacy. It's one thing to go to the doctor's office to get some help with, with personal matters. But right now, like, what we got to remember is privacy matters. And I can see the rainbow use of the breakdown, which I knew that's what that was, the rainbow color code. That's what that is. It's no secret. But you know what it is a secret? Is letting people know they have the ability to maintain privacy. So as a community here in town of Collingwood, we need to let people know that privacy matters, and to not let people into your homes that you think are going to cause harm to you, because like self-harm is a product of people being lonely, love sickness, lack of money, these kinds of things. It's very dangerous. It's one thing to say we're going to save the world and take care of everybody, but that's not true. And privacy, family values, wise spending, not dumping all your money on, strange things in the first day of financial aid day. That financial aid should be spread out between every week, bi-monthly. That's what causes the problem. Yeah, here's $1,300. Go buy whatever, and we'll see you at the Out of the Cold program in 2 days. Like, that's a load of garbage. And we need to be very careful how we hand out money in the community with financial aid. That's number one problem right there. So I haven't heard the consultant talk anything about money and the use of money. And I'd like to hear that from the consultant about wise use of money and financial aid in a time of crisis. That's where addictions start altogether, is poor spending. and people not locking their doors and turning their phones off. So let's hear it from the consultant, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. There was talk about the complex issues surrounding a number of these areas, but I will look to Ms. Warnar to comment on that.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, and thank you, Mr. Pretty, for your comments and questions. Just to speak to the privacy question that you had when you first started speaking, it was agreed, and that came out in the survey, that around access to services and looking at those 4 domains, acceptability of service was one area that we could be doing a better job in, and privacy was one thing that actually was raised, especially in the light of COVID, with everything being virtual and messages being left on machines. And so that's something that I think that we need to look at as we move forward and things start opening up, in person, and then we're still going to have an element of virtual. So when we look at overlaying that framework on organizations and we work through some of those domains and the components of each, that's where I think maybe some greater awareness and opportunities for strategy can be refined and we can move forward. Around income, I think that really comes back down to the services and how services are provided. And so I'm hoping that as we get into phase 2 and we start working through some of that and we have the lived experience, those voices at the table, some of those issues can come to the forefront. And if there is any opportunity for organizations to look at how they deliver services differently, then that's when we would be looking at in phase 2. So again, those are conversations we would hope coming to the table.
Thank you, Ms. Warnar. Sarah, is there anyone else in the gallery that would like to speak to this item?
Not at this time, Your Worship.
All right, so we have a resolution that reads as follows. The council adopt the community safety and well-being plan as presented. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Berman. And are there any further questions or comments before I call a vote? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Ms. Warnar, for all your work and for your presentation today. And that brings us to item 6, the consent agenda. We have one item on the consent agenda today, and the resolution reads that the consent agenda, having been given due consideration by the standing committee, be received, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are those of the authors and are not verified or approved as being correct. And the one item we have today is South Georgian Bay Shelter Feasibility Study. And I'll look first to receive the, and then I'll look if anyone wants to pull the item. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Berman, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Is there anyone who would like to pull the one item on the agenda today? Seeing none, we'll move on to staff reports then. And item 7.1, CAO 2021-8. Collingwood SDG Pioneer Town 2021 Habitat and Towns Collingwood World Summit. And I will pass it over to CAO Skinner, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And at the beginning of this presentation, actually, possibly before we even put the presentation up, we have our new executive assistant who's just turned her camera on. And it's Shelby Verkent, and she is replacing Krista's old position. So she'll provide executive assistant supports to me and also to the executive director of customer and corporate services. And because she's just started, and also because she did significant work updating from Krista's base, the Habitat and Towns report that you're about to hear, as well as the from scratch, the operational plan progress report that's next. I thought I should mention her. And I thought if it was okay with Your Worship, I asked her to say a sentence about her history as part of her introduction.
Yes, thank you, and welcome, Shelby. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship and CAO Skinner. Yeah, I'm pleased to have accepted this role with the town. And to have had the ability to relocate my family back to my hometown, actually. So I look forward to working with staff, members of council, and the community. I have over 12 years municipal experience. Most recently, I was working for the Norfolk County in the role of manager of corporate initiatives. So I oversaw projects of customer service, accessibility, and a wide variety of corporate initiatives for the municipality. So happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you and welcome back home.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I guess that our former director, Martin, always said that the most important thing was to set people off with a firm base and hope that they come back to us with great experience from other places. And maybe Shelby is a part of that trend. So if we could please get the report up on the SDGs. It's the Collingwood Sustainable Development Goals, Pioneer Town, Habitat and Towns Collingwood World Summit presentation. And next slide, please. So the, pardon me. So the purpose of the report is here, and we had a number of conversations about how quickly we had, as a town, entered into our arrangements with the UN and what exactly those meant for us moving forward. And there had been a request in the fall that we come back with a comprehensive staff report talking about what this work is and how it may benefit the town. So when I'm done today, there'll be a request that you receive the report, that you endorse an additional 12 months of us participating in the SDG Pioneer Town, and including the task force, which is our local task force, and our local governance and implementation team, which are your resources that organize the pilot projects and the conference, and advance our Pioneer Town initiative, including the Collingwood World Summit 2nd edition. And that council endorse in principle the proposed pilot projects. And you'll see there's some overlap with the community safety and well-being plan, which I think is a very positive thing. Next slide, please. So there are 2 memorandums of understanding that are included in the staff report that council received and are available to the public at the link in the agenda. And really it talks about how we work with the UN and specifically the Urban Economy Forum on the conference, which is the World Summit, and also on moving forward with the pilot projects. And we think this is a move in the right direction. I know we were moving quickly at the beginning, but we really needed to understand, take a step back and understand the governance structure, what the UN is doing and what we're doing, who gets to make what decisions. And I have to say, when you're a town of 20,000 plus people working with something as comprehensive as the United Nations, you do need to understand who makes the decisions and how that rolls out. One thing that's really interesting about this Collingwood SDG Pioneer Town work is that we are considered the World Sustainable Development Goal number 11 lead from a pilot perspective on things at the scale of towns. And there are a number of other projects, and I'll show you in a little bit of a complex diagram on the next slide. There's other places across the world that are looking at development and sustainable development from different scales, for example, at the level of a neighborhood. So SDG, Sustainable Development Goal number 11, is to make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Next slide, please. So this, for those of you who can see it, it's a bit of a small words. If you can't, then it is provided in the report. But basically it says that on the left, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, the United Nations Habitat Group, and the Urban Economy Forum, which is another subset of the United Nations, are working together on something called the Pavilion, which is a Regent Park World Urban Pavilion. And that Collingwood, our Sustainable Development Goal 11 Pioneer Town Initiative, is a part of that. And the other projects, for example, looking at Regent Park itself, things at the level of neighborhoods, and I know a number of other initiatives also will fall under that umbrella. And we have our up to 10 pilot projects, and one of those includes the Town Leaders Global Network, which I'll give you a couple of words about in a moment. And on the right side, we have the Urban Economy Forum and the Town of Collingwood, who are through UEF, Urban Economy Forum Steering Committee, and as well our local steering committee, also, and our technical implementation group, which is our staff level plus the mayor group, working to deliver the Collingwood World Summit Habitat in Towns ongoing conference. And if you think that that was complicated, it did take us quite a while to get it simplified to this level once we started looking at all the things that the UN group was doing. But if I don't have the names at the top of my fingertips, but that dark blue bubble, this UEF steering committee for the Collingwood World Summit, there's about 20 people on that who've been invited by the UN to participate, including all of our local steering committee. And the worldwide expertise is exceptional. A number of people from many fields to do with sustainability across the globe who've agreed to support us in moving forward with our World Summit. Next slide, please. I should have mentioned on the previous slide, sorry, that the current members of the local, if you could go back one slide, please, Stephanie. Right in the middle, the oval with the lighter color, local steering committee. The members currently are the Mayor, Brian Saunderson, our Councillor and Federation of Canadian Municipalities representative, Councillor Kathy Jeffrey, myself, our former CAO, Farid Amin, two business and community members, Mark Palmer and Larry Law, and as well our executive assistant, Shelby Verkent. And that group is also considering whether, given the roles of the local steering committee, we may wish to expand the members to include things such as, representatives such as the Social Services Roundtable, an environmental sustainability or climate change group representative, such as the local climate action team, potentially the local development community who contribute to many things that make our town more sustainable, and or a broad public interest group for sustainable development, such as the Institute for South Georgian Bay. So as we move forward through the summer, those were a number of folks that may end up, groups that may end up being designated to also participate in that local steering committee. Next slide, please. In 2020, the World Summit had 4 goals. An urban assessment, which is basically a way to benchmark whether or not you're reaching sustainable development. Sustainable resources for municipal finance. Families, including women and youth, and the impacts of COVID on town development. Next slide. And I mentioned that there are several projects that have been recommended, and fittingly, there's an overlap with the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, and also with the town's identification of the need for an affordable housing task force. That the UN also believes that Collingwood would be an excellent pilot project here, or pilot projects would include sustainable, affordable, and attainable housing. Proceeding forward with a benchmarking tool such as the City's Prosperities Index to see how we're doing right now. And the development with Collingwood in a leadership position of an international network for town level and indeed Indigenous community leaders. So not unlike the group that Collingwood has championed in South Georgian Bay for mayors and CAOs, except this would be much broader and with the support of the UN to bring in discussions on town level issues. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide. And while this work has been exciting for Collingwood, and it certainly opened up my eyes, and I have met a number of people through this initiative It's not everything we thought it would be at first blush. We thought that there would be money behind the projects. There has been none yet. However, we have had extensive support from the Urban Economy Forum offices for the conference. And then the Regent Park World Urban Pavilion, which was the left side of that diagram I walked you through, is just really coalescing now with substantial support from CMHC. So we hope that the pilot projects we've identified will start to receive other resources there, and or that we'll be able to use this type of support to help us to strengthen grant proposals that we make as a town. I mentioned the international contacts, and I haven't yet mentioned, and I think you all know, there's been some wonderful local supports that once we started on this endeavor have come out of the woodwork, notably, but certainly not limited to, the Institute of South Georgian Bay's support and public discussion series on sustainability and sustainable development goals, but many individuals as well. And so that's the overview, and I will turn it back to the chair for any further discussion or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, CAO. And I'll look to Clerk Almas. Sarah, is there anyone in our audience who would like to speak to this?
Worship, again, anybody wishing to speak to the standing committee regarding the staff report, please press the raise your hand feature. We do have two individuals expressing an interest. The first is Catherine Daw.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Ms. Daw. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. My name's Catherine Daw. I'm a member of the leadership for the Collingwood Climate Action Team, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment on this presentation. I've actually taken a look in depth at the full report, so I appreciate the amount of work that you've put into this, and also the fact that you've taken an opportunity to really step forward as a leader in presenting or taking on this challenge of SDG 11. It's no small matter, for sure, no small feat, especially 10 pilot projects are up to. So I see it as a very, very positive step towards a sustainable future. And of course, it aligns from our perspective at CCAT with the climate change SDG 13, along with a number of others as well. We certainly would appreciate the opportunity to be considered for the task force role, and hope that will be taken seriously into consideration in terms of our ability to act in a role within the task force. We certainly would bring a climate change lens. And also, I wanted to share a couple of things that I saw in the report. Certainly in the focus areas section on page 119, two stood out for me. Number F, which was about proactive approaches to climate change and environmental challenges, which of course I'm also involved with the Institute's Sustainable Series, and we will be presenting on that exact topic next week on June the 16th. So hope that many of you are going to be able to attend that, where we're going to be hearing from another local area that has taken some major steps in making that a very proactive initiative. And the other is with regard to the fact that we wanted to ensure that under the MOU with the UEF that that there is some measurement of a carbon footprint, because without measuring where we are today, how do we know where we're going, and are we actually making the progress that we are seeking to achieve? And so the last piece that I wanted to share is that the Climate Action Team is initiating a community carbon footprint challenge. And thankfully, the town staff have volunteered to be our pilot. And so we'll be starting with them next week, where they're actually going to take the footprint challenge and then go through the processes that follow that, that we're setting up. The plan is to initiate that into the public sphere and residential sphere at the end of August, early September, and we're going to be creating it both at individuals as well as groups that can put themselves together and challenge themselves to measure their footprint as residents in the town, and then take some action, and then a year or so down the line we'll remeasure and see how we're doing. So that's all that I wanted to say, and I just appreciate the opportunity to make some comments today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Worship, it doesn't look like there's any further individual requesting to speak to the committee at this time.
All right, council. What I'll do is put the resolution on the floor and then I'll open it up to council for questions and comments. The resolution reads as follows: that staff report CAO 2021-8 Collingwood SDG Pioneer Town 2021 Habitat and Towns Collingwood World Summit be received, including the draft MOUs for comment, and that council approve for an additional 12 months the Collingwood SDG Pioneer Town Task Force and UEF and Town of Collingwood Governance and Implementation Team to continue working with UN Habitat and Urban Economy Forum to advance Collingwood SDG Pioneer Town Initiative, including the 2021 Habitat and Towns Collingwood World Summit. And the council endorse in principle the proposed pilot project resulting from the inaugural Habitat and Towns Conference and ask staff to pursue within existing resources and to seek external resources. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor Jeffrey. And I'll open the floor for questions and comments. Councillor Jeffrey and then Councillor Doherty.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. And I think this is a great opportunity for us. And just building on what Catherine Daw had to say to us, how important that developing that baseline for the carbon footprint is so important. And Collingwood signed up with an FCM program with the ability to be able to accomplish that for our municipality at no cost with access to their expertise. So I'm hoping that in staff's plan and moving forward with that jointly with CCAT, that we are going to put our foot forward in getting that effort going with those resources available to us through FCM. So I'll be supporting it. I think this is great for the town.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Doherty, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a general observation, perhaps this will wind up being directed to the CAO, but this, I fully support an extension of this project into year 2, having audited the summit last year. There was just so much expertise and so much learning to be had, and our town cannot help but benefit by participation in this program. That said, within the prospectus that was put together by the Urban Economic Forum, there was reference to the fact that economically our primary focus, being Collingwood's primary focus, was tourism. And really, this is not consistent with our economic development strategy. And in fact, if we continued to be primarily focused on tourism, it is not ultimately going to answer a lot of our questions and concerns relative to sustainability when we think of jobs and well-paying jobs. I realize that we have a number of locals, people represented on the board right now, but I just want to confirm that, in fact, our focus and our representation to this group is that we are earnestly seeking a more diverse economic base in Collingwood.
Yeah, that's true. I understand the concern. I think it references our entire economic development action plan and observes that we do have a tourism component to it, but I don't think it means that we focus primarily on tourism. I'll look to the CAO and then I will make one further comment based on a tourism beyond COVID seminar I attended recently, set up by the mayor of Whistler. Go ahead, CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Doherty. That's a good catch if in fact it does state it that way. I totally agree with the mayor that it is a component of our economic development action plan, but it's certainly not the only path. It's one of the paths toward our sustainable future. And Mayor, at the right time, I did neglect to mention a change in dates that I'll address when the time is right, please.
Okay, certainly. Yeah, thank you. And just to follow up on your comment, Councillor Doherty, because it is a very good one, the tourism sector worldwide is acknowledging that transatlantic and international plane fare can, with a single flight, use up your entire carbon footprint for a year if we're trying to meet the Kyoto Accord. So we are, I think, recognizing is that tourism will be taking on a far more local bent, is making sure for day trips, drivability, and domestic flights, so that we're going to be promoting Canadian tourism across the country. So that's one aspect that the tourism industry is recommending its own sustainability issues and planning to work around those and address them. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the CAO. I just want to be very, very clear. We are not spending additional funds on making this summit happen this year, is my first question. My second question is, this summit happening this year will be virtual? I'm assuming that's a yes, since we're only entering stage 1 on Friday. And also my third question is, how many dollars have we spent already? If you can give us a ballpark on that. Thank you.
CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor McLeod. We have not set up any significant funds to spend on this. Last year, we had committed to, before we knew anything about COVID, we had committed to book the hotel rooms for the conference, but ultimately it was virtual, so we didn't spend that money. And we're continuing on the same tactic this year. We haven't been asked to financially contribute toward the work. However, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that we have spent a good amount of staff time on this. I feel it has been worthwhile, but between myself, Krista Carter, and now Shelby Burkent and a couple of others, not to mention the mayor's time himself and a bit of time from Farida Min. So there's been time spent on it. The meeting is proposed to be either virtual or mostly virtual for 2021. And I was just I wanted to pull up the dates. And I can't find them right this second. But basically, here it is.
They're October 7th and 8th.
Yes.
Thursday and Friday.
Right. So October is, I'm going to get back to the virtual versus non-virtual, but the October is World Urban Month. Urban October is October. And in the first week, the Monday and Tuesday is the Urban Economy Forum's International Conference. You may recall that the mayor attended and spoke at that conference last year, a year ago. I think it was a year ago. Could have been a year and a bit ago, but anyway, the mayor did attend the first inaugural event of that conference. And it will be partially in person. That's their intentions anyway. Remember, that's not our conference, that's theirs. And then Wednesday will be no events, and Thursday and Friday is proposed to be October 7th and 8th, the Collingwood World Summit. So I think there's a couple of benefits to that. I don't know if there are I don't know, I'm 90% positive, but certainly not entirely positive that there won't be anyone physically here, but we're planning for virtual. In the future, however, and we did get some feedback from council members the last time we talked about this, they thought that October or outside the summer would be a better time. In fact, I know Councillor Hamlin had mentioned this to me, would be a better time. It's a better time for our businesses to be receiving that business. And it's also a time when we may attract more people internationally because it's not in the summer vacation time. And I think marrying this with the larger UEF conference means that people who've traveled to Canada from other jurisdictions may stay for our conference as well. So I think virtual, or certainly substantially if not entirely virtual, will be the case for 2021. And how much money have we spent on this already? I think we've spent essentially no money on it in 2021. There's a possibility that there'll be some money spent, but it's likely things like kilometers to travel somewhere for a staff person, or muffins for a meeting that runs over lunchtime. Thank you.
Councillor McLeod, any follow-up? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a great report and step forward for us as a town and the UN initiative. As one of the 3 members on council who sit on the Affordable Housing Task Force, I just say, I really hope we can make the pilot project work with the initiatives that the Affordable Housing Task Force is looking at, because that would be such a win-win, I think, for the community. And secondly, I just wanted to comment, through you, Mr. Mayor, our CAO mentioned that one of the pilots could also be getting information to assess where or how our town's doing. And the mention was by reference to the city's prosperity index. So I just wanted to also add that prior to COVID, which stopped the initiative, I had been a huge proponent of our town undertaking a Youthful Cities Index consultation, which would allow us to do some research with young people and get an understanding of why our town is attractive to young people, and if not, what we could do to make it more attractive. Youthful Cities has since also partnered with RBC, and they are looking at youthful cities from a work component with the goal of trying to make sure that our centers are vibrant places, not only for youth to work, to live, but to work. So I just really wanted to add that comment that I hope we could include a youth component into our assessing of information, as we all know youth are so important to the future of our town and its economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I would just comment that it has been exciting 18 months for Collingwood in hosting the first World Summit. We've certainly learned a lot, and I think we've gained a lot of traction, both provincially, nationally, and internationally. And I look forward to the second iteration this year, and to finding concrete pilot projects that we can implement locally, and to finding funding from other levels of government or other payors to assist us with those very important projects. So I will be supporting this. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to item 7.2, which is CAO 2021-9 Operational Plan Q1 Progress Report. And I will pass it back to CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will try to run through this one quickly. There is a deck and a report, obviously, in your package. With the operational planning, the managers and our area specialists have risen to the challenge, in my opinion, to implement operational planning, and I do see an increased collaboration and breaking down of silos between the different departments. I think that council's priorities are getting done, and it is making a difference in our community. And I know from all of us experiencing these long meetings, we know that we're driving forward with a number of reforms to support the community overall. The next slide, please. So we do have a community-based vision. So people thriving here and living more now, which was set out and renewed by council, tweaked and renewed by council last July. And everything that we do really is driving us toward this vision of the community. So on the next slide, we have a strategic framework, and that vision, with just that quick refresher of the vision we just went through, is the pinnacle of where we're going. The strategic plan and our strategic transformation projects are the things that we're really changing to drive us toward your vision. And then, of course, we continue to deliver and continuously improve all of our town programs and services. And that happens by individuals doing the things that they're supposed to do. And the things that they're supposed to do are set out in our operational plan. So that's the strategic framework that we're jumping from today. So I wanted to walk you through just a couple of the updates. And what I'm going to start on the next slide, I'm just going to go through the 5 pillars of the strategic plan. And next slide, please. So there's 5 slides here. So for transparent and accountable government, we've done the judicial inquiry follow-up, seeking input from the public, past CAOs, et cetera, and reported back to council for council's direction on this piece. We're positioned to receive the legal recommendations from the judicial inquiry. And I was going to mention later, but I could mention now that we've heard back from the legal firm that council had asked to do a final bit of work. And I believe that they'll be ready to report back within June. So we'll have to figure out if we can do that at a regular meeting, or there'll be a need for a special meeting to get that to you as soon as practical. And we're doing work on our policies to continue to make Collingwood a town with one of the most progressive and transparent policy regimes of any town our size in Ontario, possibly in Canada. You know that Simcoe County, through some work by the mayor and deputy mayor, has supported our initiative in asking the province to act. And we're going to be submitting a response to the Dunlop inquiry, asking for the Collingwood amendments to Ontario's Municipal Act and other legislation. The asset management plan for our core assets is on track. The province moved their deadline, but we're still planning to have the information to you for the end of Q3. And this is very important, mostly because it impacts council's decisions on the budget. How much should be put aside for reserves and used for capital projects moving forward. You've also invested in our community through the asset sale proceeds. So we're now able to really put that money to work. So we have the Greening Legacy Fund, the Arts and Culture Legacy Fund, and there'll be some policies coming forward to you on how to use those, as well as, of course, the other decisions to put us on a better financial footing. Including, and I should have added in there the other items that were included in the asset sale proceeds resolution. Next slide, please. The second pillar is connections to a world-class waterfront. We remain positioned to close and evaluate a P3 RFP for the terminals in this term in 2022. We'll have our new executive director on board in July, and this will be one of her primary first priorities. And the built heritage assessment that will be incorporated in the RFP from a heritage perspective is closing shortly. Next, there's a few other things that are happening on the connections to the world-class waterfront, including the Revitalized Parks bylaw with a new recognition of residents' privileges, the paid parking implementation at Sunset Point, the Harborview Park Boardwalk. We assessed the proposal from the Caesar Bar for a food and alcohol truck at Millennium Park. We've also had the Awen Splash Pad and the Eco Park revitalization get kicked off. And I had neglected to mention on the previous slide, there was a number of other things also on transparent and accountable government that are happening, such as continuing to manage the lobbyist registry, developing this operational planning approach, a review of the committee and board structures, leadership on and support of the South Georgian Bay Mayors and CAOs Forum, enabling our residents to get more things virtually, such as virtual City Hall for taxes, online dog tags, burn permits, etc., building permits, a full review of our programs and services through Deloitte. And I do think, and I hope you agree with me, that our customer service keeps getting better at the types of services that we're providing to residents and how quickly they're getting answers. Moving on to the third pillar, which is slide number 6. The third pillar was about supporting and managing the growth and prosperity in Collingwood. So the official plan continues to be underway. We were very pleased with the youth submissions that were recently completed, and we're anticipating a September submission to council. We talked earlier about the new Tecumseh water supply and pipeline agreements. And so I'll keep going, as well as the water treatment plant expansion. And we've been doing a lot of work to solve the water capacity challenges. With respect to supporting and managing growth and prosperity overall, with COVID, we have been able to revisit and update the boulevard encroachments to support downtown businesses and patios. And I did see an announcement earlier today that it might patios might be able to open a couple of days earlier than the 14th. So I haven't had a chance to digest that yet, but I think it was really good news for our local patios. And we're still assessing under our economic development group the COVID recovery task force's second set of recommendations, which they provided recently. And I'm really pleased to remind everyone that we will now have a business accelerator. So for supporting and managing growth and prosperity, we filled with council's support a gap in our community for helping businesses to move forward. Slide 7 is the second last pillar, and it's about enhancing well-being and sustainability. So you've just endorsed our community safety and well-being plan, which was a requirement of the province for every local municipality that we are now in compliant with well in advance of their July deadline. With respect to the green and climate change agendas, the climate change specialist contract position will be posted shortly, and with the new Greening Reserve Fund, Council has positioned us to drive forward on green initiatives. We hope that will move quickly once it gets started soon. You're going to hear a little bit more from the climate action team shortly about how we've been collaborating with them, and there's been a successful community cleanup project, socially distanced, that happened this spring. And the CBIN installation is underway, and that's the little, some devices that clean the water in the harbor. So that could be really interesting to hear a bit more about once they're pumping water in the next couple of days. And we've been developing a plan to get the grant writing approach finalized per council's direction to do so. On this side, we also have on the operational items done things like from the library implemented the Hoopla streaming service, bylaws trained on their bicycles and they're using them. We've centralized our real-time town energy consumption analysis. So there's a few more items. And on the 5th of the 5 pillars, next slide, please. We have worked very hard to advance diversity and inclusion, and Councillor Jeffrey had given us the news quite recently that the entire Canadian Federation of Canadian Municipalities passed the Town of Collingwood's resolution to petition the Canadian government to adjust legislation to clarify and strengthen hate speech, including explicit recognition of the harm caused by hateful symbols, for example, such as Confederate flag. And I think this is a poster case of the little engine that could, in little Collingwood, having influence on the Canada-wide stage to hopefully make some positive changes within our country. The Unity Collective has continued to meet, and we have some training underway, as well as a really attractive rainbow crosswalk that will be installed in the next few weeks that council saw quite recently. There's a few things that have been on the next slide 9, please, adjusted since the last update. We knew we had the Attainable Housing Task Force at the last update. We didn't know how enthusiastic that task force would be. Certainly the members are meeting very regularly, and they're positioning the community to enhance what we may have put in the official plan and to redevelop one or more properties. We do have a new coalescence on council to proactively address speeding and increase safety by implementing traffic calming at multiple sites. And so we'll need to look at how to make sure that we have that resourced, but we did hear council loudly that that was something that you were interested in doing, and it will make a difference in our community as early as this summer and fall. We've been able to implement the interim accessible transit arrangements that were decided on, and we've deferred some items. I'm just going to mention one here, the town hall elevator replacement, because we thought we needed to understand the post-COVID situation before we realized if we needed to put the elevator up to the currently unused top floor at town hall, or if that wasn't necessary. Now, I've talked a lot about strategic items, but the last slide is about the Q1 operational item counts, because the operational plan is about much more than just those strategic items. So this is really just accounting. And so 43 items from the operational plan were completed in Q1. We've already have 30 of Q2s completed, and we've started quite a few, 72 more for Q2, as well as a good start. Those are the red bars as you go toward the top left of the diagram for Q3 and Q4. And one thing that I really wanted to emphasize is that this is a new approach for us. We think it's a way to communicate with council and the public the things that are happening to make our community, under council's leadership, the community it needs to be, with a full understanding that council is directing that strategy change and that staff are implementing the operational things that fall from running our programs and services. I think that if we do 80% of the items, we will be doing really well, and we will be moving the yardstick in how staff manage and manage across departments. And I am pleased with the reports and my ability to pull information from it for you to date. And that's the update for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, CAO. Clerk Almus, I'll look to you to see if there's anybody in our audience that would like to speak to this item.
Worship, we do have Matthew Pretty wishing to address the committee. We'll allow him to speak.
Good afternoon, Mr. Pretty.
Hey there. I'm in good spirits today and getting through some personal challenges and trying to reflect on the town's future here, and just signed back in, working as a personal aide this summer with my mom. Yeah, that is outstanding. And holy cow. One thought I have for the waterfront, I wonder if the elevator, if we just renovated the top half, don't worry about the body of the elevator, replace the glass, make it into a museum, tourist location. You know, that's one option with that elevator instead of, you know, trying to make it into like residential, residential dwelling. We could save it by maybe just, you know, getting the top half created. Excellent report. Other than that, yeah, we have work to do with regards to linking the shore together, and obviously the traffic safety program. I just reviewed the Out of the Cold housing hub. Great plan, the 20-person bed system and the references for that with attaining housing. It's a great idea. Again, location is very key to make sure that there is an activity at night happening along the trailways and the parks. We don't want to attract late night activities in alleys, back parking lots, and trailways. That needs to be seen with great respect and risk. We need to be very careful there. I know City of Barrie went through a massive overtaking from persons at large downtown at the Salvation Army, and I've seen it on my way to Toronto, and it's very dangerous. We need to be extremely careful where we position that. Other than that, looking good, and you've got a great team there with the plan, operational plan. And the parks are looking great. I've seen the people. Great that you're allowing barbecuing on the east side. That's smart. Divide it up a bit. Good stuff. I toured through there the other day. Looking good. And obviously, yeah, let's get these businesses back to work with these decks and patios and Simcoe Street Farmers Market, all that great stuff. all that great stuff. So step by step, and the CAO is doing a wonderful job navigating the town through a very trying time. So I'll sign off and continue listening to this key time. We need to set a very strong direction here. Okay, signing off. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Gomez, is there anyone else who would like to speak to this item?
No, there is not, Your Worship.
All right, Council, will put the resolution on the floor and then open it up for discussion. That staff report CAO 2021-9, 2021 operational plan Q1 progress report be received. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor Madigan. Council, questions, comments? Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. Thank you to the CAO for an interesting report. I have to confess that I'm going to probably take out some shares in eyeglasses since that chart, the little teeny tiny one, is very hard on this lady's eyes. Actually, I want to ask a couple of questions through you, Mr. Mayor. The first one to Councillor Jeffrey. I'm caught by slide 8, where it was discussed about the motion that recently made it through the FCM, and I'm trying to remember the numbers. How many municipalities belong to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities? Is it hundreds? Is it thousands? I'm just trying to think about how many places heard our name last week.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Through to Councillor McLeod. The updated membership report showed that we are actually up in the year of COVID. We have 2,033 member communities in FCM, which represents 92% of Canadians.
Thank you.
Who heard you?
Thank you. And I think that it ought to. Thank you for stick handling that through the FCM, but also tip of the hat to Councillor Hamlin for bringing that to us in the first place, and tip of the hat to this council for supporting it unanimously for you to take and run with. Also through you, Mr. Mayor, to Executive Director Culver, Acting Executive Director AED Culver. In that big list that I referenced just a minute or two ago, it talks about completed items, and item number 42 is the boardwalk out into at Harborview Park. I walk there periodically, and I've noticed it, and it says that it's complete, but most places have railings. Does this one not get a railing? Are we required to? I'm a little nervous going out there, and even though the water is about knee high, but this year, can you tell me when it says complete? Is that true? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Executive Director, go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, through Your Worship. So there's no codes or legislation that requires railings on that, and one of the intents we had was to provide as an immersive experience as possible in the wetlands. However, we have heard this concern from one or two people, and so we're continuing to look at it and see if there are reasons why railings might be considered. But they would be obstructive to that immersive experience, so which is why we didn't go down that path in the beginning.
I'm not recommending them. I'm happy to not have them. I just thought, oh, is it done? Okay, thank you. And I think that's all of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, any other questions? Councillor Jeffrey, and then Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So really through you to the CAO, I think this is a great reporting process and more inclusive for council to keep on top as to where we are standing with some of our initiatives, albeit that huge list that Councillor McLeod referred to. I was almost afraid to read it because there are some pretty long-standing things contained within that list, which will challenge us going forward. But one of the biggest messages I heard at FCM over our AGM and workshops last week was the fact that municipalities can no longer do business the way they've been doing it. We have to, and that's just not based on our relationship with the federal government, a bit, a more direct relationship there. But it's really our ability to pivot post-COVID within our municipalities to work more quickly and more aggressively on the things we need to get done. And there was some examples from municipalities across Canada. City of Edmonton and Penticton have actually eliminated single family zoning from their official plan to address the eating up the green space and housing people. And there was another example where municipalities are becoming more aggressive at still engaging with the public, but making it more easily and quicker for municipalities to achieve affordable housing projects. So we have a lot of that on our horizon too. So that's one of the messages I wanted to bring back from FCM. So it will be a challenge given what's left on that list, but maybe in going forward, there will be an ability for staff to make things go more quickly, but maybe in the terms of the post-COVID recovery, some of those old things aren't part of that for the town somehow. So I think there'll be some reckoning going forward. And those are my comments. Thank you, Mayor Saunders.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you very much. And through you to the CAO, I'll echo Councillor Jeffrey's comments that this is a great reporting tool. And I am getting in the habit of keeping them so that I can track as best I can on a list of 400 activities that our municipality is involved in. Kudos in that regard. And I think it's important for the public to see, just how much is involved in running this community according to their expectations and their desires. That said, there was a couple of items that stuck out to me, and I just wanted to ask about them. The first is the Maple Street Bike Priority Project. That I had understood that this was moving forward, but I see from the report that it's on hold. And I'm just wondering if you can update me on, is that a temporary hold or hold for the rest of the year, or what is it?
CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I recall talking with Director Slama about that. I think it's a temporary item. Yes, there she's had some information.
Go ahead, Director Slama.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through yourself, to Councillor Doherty. It's a temporary hold. Manager Vellick and his engineering team have been working shorthanded for quite some time. So he's just, working through a hiring process for, one new position and one replacement position. And so we've got one of those two hired. And we've also been in discussion, obviously, with the Active Transportation Committee, and they were aware of our need just to put it on hold for a few months until he could have, Manager Vellick had more resources to move the project forward. We have worked with the committee, and they've been able to do some components for us and assist Manager Vellick with that. So we're doing that as much as possible. But the intention is to move it forward this year.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Councillor Doherty?
No, thank you. The other item that I will ask about is not only because it's on hold, but because it has been assigned a low priority, and that is implementation of our urban forest management plan. And that was a plan that came to council in 2019. There are 10 or more items that should have been implemented or be in process by 2021, which as far as I can see have not advanced. And our urban forest management plan is so much more than just a consideration of aesthetics in our community. It has to do with climate change. It has to do with traffic calming. It has to do with the character that it provides to our neighborhoods. So I'm just wondering why it's at a low priority right now, and do we anticipate that it's going to be have an elevated priority in the foreseeable future?
Okay, Director Slama, or who's going to handle that? I know Dean, Director Culver was dealing with some of that, and I see he's here. Should I put, there you are. Okay, Director Culver.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. The interesting part about the forest plan has been the shared responsibility between PRC and PW, and that it was agreed upon and indicated to council a while ago that a forestry division ultimately, when fully formed, would reside within the public works area. So, so I will defer to Director Slama.
Okay, Director Slama.
Through yourself to Councillor Doherty. So, yeah, when looking at aspects that we could bring forward in the urban forestry management plan, another item is resources. So there's a requirement for resources for a forester to develop the plan, and also some equipment. So we had brought those items forward as budget considerations for 2021. And those were not approved. So that is why for this year, we've indicated that it's on hold for 2021. I believe it's every intention to bring forward the same considerations for the 2022 budget.
Follow up, Councillor Doherty.
No, thank you. I just hope that staff and council will reconsider their prioritization of this particular project in 2022, because in the meantime, we continue to lose trees. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, council, before we call the vote? Seeing none, it's a very extensive report, and as referred to in a number of places, it also shows the number of items we have on our large to-do list. And so I think we need to marshal that moving forward, and I think council needs to keep that in mind as we bring forward some new initiatives. So it's an ongoing discussion, but certainly a consideration. And with that being said, I'll call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to item 7.3, T 2021-4, 2021 final tax rates. And I will pass it over to Treasurer. Sorry, I've lost it. I can't find you, Monica. Where are you?
I'm here.
Oh, sorry, you've already come on screen. My apologies. You're ahead of me. Okay, go ahead, Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. I think the report covers everything. I just want to highlight a few key pieces. This is an annual requirement. It's in preparation of our final tax bills being sent out, which will occur next month here in town. The tax rates are calculated based on the previously adopted budgeted amounts for 2021. And I think perhaps one of the most important pieces is that for residential and fully occupied commercial and industrial properties overall, they will see a decrease or a reduction in the total property taxes they paid this year in comparison to what they paid in 2020. There are a few other changes that occurred this year with respect to vacant and excess unit properties. In the past, there was a 30% discount applied to these types of properties in comparison to a fully occupied commercial or industrial unit. And as part of the County of Simcoe's 2021 tax rate bylaw, the tax ratios were updated to remove this discount. Similarly, education tax rates in the past also reflected a 30% discount to these categories or subunits of our vacant and excess unit properties. However, this was updated in the 2020 taxation year for education and was removed as well. Unfortunately, there was an error in our final 2020 tax bills with respect to vacant and excess unit properties only, and with respect to the education portion only as well. At this point, town staff is currently communicating with the ministry and will work on a plan to move forward, which may include the reissuance of those property tax bills, specifically again for the vacant and excess unit properties.
Treasurer, you're just cutting in and out a bit. We're having your volume is fluctuating. I don't know if you can fix that, please.
Okay, let me try to fix it a bit more here.
Be even just a little bit closer to your microphone. Yeah.
I'm going to try and do that too. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Speak up a little bit more. So sorry, do you want me to go back to the beginning or whereabouts?
I think it would be helpful if you just went over the issues with this the changes in this classification, and
okay.
We can bring it forward from there. That'd be great, please.
Okay, my apologies. So there were a few other changes that occurred this year with respect to vacant and excess unit properties. In the past, there was a 30% discount applied to these types of properties in comparison to a fully occupied commercial or industrial unit. As part of the County of Simcoe's 2021 tax rate bylaw, the tax ratios were updated to remove this discount. Similarly, the education tax rates in the past also reflected a 30% discount to these types of properties. This, however, was updated in the 2020 taxation year, or last year to be more specific, to be removed as well. Unfortunately, there was an error on our final 2020 tax bills, which impacts the vacant and excess unit properties only, and for their education portion only as well. And they were charged the reduced rate, or the 30% discount rate that has been charged in years past. Right now, staff is communicating with the ministry to work through this situation. And that could include the reissuance of those property tax bills, again, specific to the excess unit and vacant properties only. So I can pass it over to you, Your Worship, for any questions or consideration.
Thank you, Treasurer Quinlan. Before I go to council, I will look to the clerk to see if there's anyone from the public that has questions or would like to speak to this item.
Certainly, Your Worship, we have new attendees joining us as well. So if you're participating via telephone, please press *9 to raise your hand. If you're on your computer or smartphone, please press the raise your hand feature should you wish to address the committee regarding this report. At this point, we have Matthew Pretty wishing to address the report.
All right, Mr. Pretty.
Yes, thank you very much. I believe the finance department is the new representative. Is doing a great job. I just wonder, with regards to finances, I know Councillor McLeod is just saying some of the charts are a bit, overly detailed. Is there a section on the Collingwood.ca website that shows quarter to quarter to quarter to quarter breakdowns and the summaries of that? Where is the link on the website for us to review financial status of your financial program? Thank you.
Treasurer Quinlan.
So right now, there isn't actually a spot on the website. However, we are later in this meeting, we are discussing Q1 for 2021, and we will be isolating a spot on the finance or treasury page to show each quarter's review as we go forward.
Good, thank you. All right, Sarah, are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to this item?
No, Your Worship, not at this time.
All right, so I'll put the resolution on the floor and open it up to questions from council. The resolution reads that council receives staff report T 2021-4 2021 final tax rates for information, and further that a bylaw be enacted to provide for the levy and collection of 2021 tax levies against all rateable property in the town of Collingwood. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor Madigan. Thank you. And I'll open the floor then to questions and comments. Councillor Hamlin and then Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I have a comment and through you, Mr. Mayor, a question for our treasurer. This past year, and I guess into this year as well, the province has frozen assessments on properties. And of course, that's been a boon to residential property owners because those values have increased. But for commercial industrial properties where their values maybe have dropped because they've had no tenants, it's been a bit of a hardship. And I now, through reading the report, have come to realize that the county is Simcoe, and therefore affecting us, we have eliminated the advantage that properties have had for a few decades, whereby if the commercial, industrial, retail properties were vacant, the owners of the property could apply for a tax rebate. And I know when this provision came in, it was brought in at the time when the province, and this is maybe too much information, but eliminated business taxes and combined all the taxes on the property, which eliminated an automatic reduction if a property was vacant that would otherwise be entitled to. So that spawned this vacancy rebate. So I'm just so disappointed to hear now that the most senior level, which is the province, is eliminating it for the residential, for the school board portion, and the county is eliminating it for their portion and therefore our portion as well. My question then is, has the county done any impact on what this will have on our commercial, industrial, retail sector by eliminating this vacancy rebate opportunity?
Treasurer Quinlan.
Your worship, through you to Councillor Hamlin. Just to clarify, this is a little bit different than the vacancy rebate that used to be in place. So there was sort of a two-step process, I suppose, in getting those rebates, but this is specific to the tax ratios themselves. And the county did do quite an extensive amount of research, and going back to November, I believe 2019, and I'm sorry, don't quote me on the dates, is when they first started to take a look or analyze the fact that, in fact, the education property tax portion was going to remove this discount first, and understand the impact of that to commercial properties, as well as moving to the next level of actually eliminating the ratio within their own purview, so within the county tax rates as well. So I guess there's two parts to it. The tax ratios themselves are intended to try and keep fairness associated with from property to property class. And I think, with respect to the commercial property class in total, in fact, the total dollars that are raised has not changed, but in fact, just the type of property has altered in terms of what they would collect. So, for example, on a fully occupied commercial property, the tax rate, in fact, goes down this year in comparison to a vacant or excess unit property, where, of course, the tax rate increase. I don't want to put words in the mouth of the county, but there certainly has been a lot of research, and they lean on our municipal tax advisors at MTE to help them understand all aspects of the situation.
Thank you for that response. And as a follow-up through you, Mr. Mayor, is it possible that you could make available to council whatever reports the county has done on the impact?
Through you, your worship. I have included the attached MPE in our report. So the presentation that, again, our policy tax advisors included as an attachment to this report, but certainly I can provide the county reports themselves that came forward. I think that would be helpful.
Okay, thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any questions or comments on the tax rates? Go ahead, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This question will be related actually to the line of questioning of Councillor Hamlin, and will be to Treasurer Quinlan. And there was quite a bit of attention paid in the county report and the county presentation to the notion of a small business tax reduction. And certainly this is topical based on what we know has been the hardship that the pandemic has been to our small businesses. But it was also, very highly emphasized that there was any number of complications that would be related to actual implementation as to, who qualifies and on what basis do they qualify and so on. But it led me to think about, rather than the notion of a tax reduction for small business, the notion of a limited tax rebate, at least for this year, based on the impact of the pandemic and the number of small businesses that have been closed or virtually not operating. And the idea that perhaps such a rebate, if approved, could be recouped by the municipality out of the COVID recovery funds that have been provided by the province. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were generally on the notion of a small business tax, and whether you felt that there was any merit in the notion of a one-time rebate. Thank you.
Treasurer Quinlan.
Your worship, through you to Councillor Doherty. I think it's a great question, and there has been a lot of talk, especially since the province has announced that was part of the 2021-22 budget. I think one aspect of it that's a little bit tricky is that because we are a multi-tier municipality, we do have to wait for our upper tier, which would be the County of Simcoe, to accept this small business property subclass before we could actually put into place that subclass itself. That being said, I know all of the things that the county has discussed and you've raised here are all very good questions about how we would move forward with such a system, because I guess what would likely be the most difficult piece to answer is how we define small business. And I feel that there could be quite a few responses, and how we depending on who you ask, it would be a very different answer. But again, I do think it's a relevant question. So all that being said, since we heard about this property subclass possibly coming in place, my tax clerk and I have discussed it just to kind of think through, what could we do if this does come into place, because essentially what would happen is that once the county said, yes, this is now a property subclass in our system, the municipality would have to come forward with sort of how we would administer it, I guess. And some of the things we've tossed around were thoughts or ideas around the fact that, just similar to what Councillor Hamlin had brought up earlier on the vacancy rebate, that maybe it became an application-based system. And that might be a way to sort of work through it. Now, again, there'd still be the policy questions of, who's eligible, how do we apply it, how do we fund it? One of the funding propositions could be that it's funded throughout the rest of the classes, meaning the other property classes may have an impact because of it. So there would be some discussion about that as well, I'm sure. So I think I can't really fully answer your question other than to say we're definitely thinking about it. I think the county has discussed it at length as well. And we do need to sort of rely on them before we can actually come up with our own programs.
Follow up, Councillor Doherty?
No, thank you. I appreciate that explanation.
Okay, Council, any other questions or comments? Then I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. This brings us to item 7.4. We've got all related reports here, so the treasurer is very busy. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just my earlier note today, I'm signing off from this meeting at this point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brings us to, Clerk Thomas, I will leave it to you to reflect in the minutes that the Deputy Mayor had to leave for another appointment. Brings us to item 7.4, T2021-8 2020 financial year end memo. I'll pass it over to Treasurer Quinn.
Again, and through you, Your Worship. I think to say the least, 2020 was an interesting year for everyone. I do feel, however, that both council and staff were very responsive and proactive in addressing the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The town, of course, was fortunate to receive funding through the province to assist in offsetting some of the impacts of this. And I would say finishing off 2020 overall, the town is in good financial position despite the impacts of the pandemic. And this is largely due to sound financial decisions that have been made, as well as the healthy level of growth that the town has seen over the past several years. This year, the total surplus that was generated was just under 1.4 million and is due primarily to supplementary bills or growth, as we talked about, and savings seen in salaries and contracted services. In following the surplus deficit management policy, town staff have applied this surplus to the accumulated prior year's capital deficit. At the time, this amount was just under $1.7 million, and applying this year's surplus reduces that deficit to just over $300,000, which I think is great news. Over the next few weeks, the town's auditors, as well as staff, are working to complete the draft financial statements as a presentation to members of council at July's SIC meeting. And I think, again, overall, the town is in a good, sound financial position, and we look forward to the many challenges and opportunities that present themselves throughout 2021. And I think I can pass it back to you again, Your Worship.
Okay, Clerk Thomas, is there anyone in our audience that would like to speak to this report?
Yes, there is, Your Worship. We have one phone-in caller, so we will unmute him or her so that they can speak.
Hello?
By pressing *6, you can unmute yourself. And the phone-in caller should press *6 to further unmute themselves.
There you go.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Mayor Saunderson. It's Tim Fryer, 75 Georgian Manor Drive.
Mr. Farr, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank
Good.
you.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Deputy Mayor Hull. I'm sorry, I just heard Mayor Hull said he couldn't stay on the meeting. And the council members for an opportunity to speak with you on this matter. I will begin by saying I only had an opportunity to consider agenda item 7.4 this morning. Then I've listened to the presentation by Treasurer Quinlan just now. So admittedly, there is very detailed information that is being considered as well. I recognize that the 2020 budget and tax rate setting was not under the purview of the current treasurer. I haven't been able to do my normal review of questions that I have with finance staff before taking anything forward to you. So I am not going to do anything more right now than just make some high-level observations, and I will follow up as required. The basis of my observations is to circle back on the former presentation I made to Council about 2020 budget back in the latter part of 2019. The focus continues to be that Collingwood's taxpayers excessive taxation and unfair allocations, partly due to cross-subsidizations that I have previously noted, should be immediately addressed by Council. For me, that is the crux of the issue I am raising. Regarding the actual report, firstly, it is indicated on page 2 and 3, just as I had forecasted to Council in 2019, there once again is a substantial surplus of approximately $2.5 million, or about 7% of the 2020 budgeted municipal tax levy of $35.7 million. So 2020 is another year, which makes it, by my count, 6 in a row, of a yearly average net operating surplus of about 9% on council budgets that are supposed to be zero-based. As in the previous years, there isn't anything in detail on these pages that indicates, as I have presented to you about in the past, this is due to anything other than inaccurate budgeting. Secondly, something that should stand out to Council is that, as noted, the actual 2020 municipal tax revenue was almost exactly what I predicted back in 2019, coming in at around $36.3 million. If you compare that to 2014's $27.6 million, that's almost $9 million more annually, with no strategic financial plan to outline how this is justified. So that's almost a 1/3 increase in just 6 years, so well over 5% per year. To close off, as an overtaxed taxpayer, I do eagerly anticipate Treasurer Quinlan bringing forward more accurate budget projections for 2022, which will therefore hopefully allow Council to finally be able to recognize, because of those forecasts and not the usual reasons, that some tax relief should be implemented. I will close off at that, and again, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Treasurer Quinlan, maybe you might like to explain, sorry, I'm losing my words here, the impact of new taxation coming online and the budgeting process and how we have to budget for, obviously, as at least a zero budget. We can't budget for a deficit, and if you don't have significant surplus coming online, then you're going to have an issue.
Sure, yes, Your Worship, thank you. I think to start off, I just want to clarify that the surplus actually represents about 3.9% of the total budget for 2020. Specifically, the largest portion of that, as you alluded to, Your Worship, is the fact that supplementary billings equate to a large portion of the surplus themselves. And I think what can be difficult to assess and understand in full is what the total growth for the municipality may or may not be for that year. Also, any request for reconsideration, any terms of reduction in assessment, and the fact that they go over 3 years can cause municipalities, and I would say most municipalities, the same sort of angst when it comes to budgeting specifically for that supplementary billing. So I don't think what the town has done is uncommon or poor budgeting practice. I think, in fact, it makes sense to ensure that we have the appropriate funding in place so that we can avoid the deficit. That being said, I also feel that for 2020 specifically, that there was quite a bit of, I don't want to say reaction, maybe that's not the right word, but members of council and town staff put things in place. And possibly there were some additional delays, specifically when I look at the capital portion as well, because of the pandemic. So I won't speak to prior years, but I'll say that this year, certainly that did have an impact on the overall portion. Again, though we have applied it to an accumulated deficit that is present in the capital portion of the fund. So I think what we've done makes sense and is reasonable.
Thank you. CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate that Mr. Fryer is interested in the town finances, so I'll start off with that. And I think it's good that that people in town are interested in those. I did want to make a point, unless the treasurer disagrees with me, but one other thing that I think is important to know is while We have had a surplus that was reinvested in the town. While we have had a surplus, it has been reinvested in the town in our reserves. And those reserves have become healthier, but they are very important for us to be able to deliver on our capital asset needs. And I think that when you receive the report on the capital asset plan that is targeting Q3 of this year, you'll see that those reinvestments have put us in a better position, but potentially not a perfect position. But I just wanted to make it clear to those listening and to council that when we do have a surplus, we are able to use it for future benefits to the community. And I don't think we've been over investing in those. So there'll be some more information following later this year on that. Thank you.
Thank you, CAO Skinner. I think Mr. Fryer was a member of council when we passed that policy, so he'll be familiar with it. Sir, is there anyone else who would like to speak to this item?
No, Your Worship, not at this time.
All right, council. So I'll put the motion on the table and then open the floor. And the motion reads that staff report T 2021-8 2020 financial year end memo be received, and further that council approves the final surplus allocation to fund prior year's accumulated capital deficit in accordance with policy FIN-004-01. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Berman and Councillor Jeffrey. Questions or comments, council? Got Councillor Madigan and then Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. And I kind of take a little bit of offense to anybody saying that 6 years of positivity is a negative thing. Last time I heard, positive means positive. So I would like to thank our fantastic staff that have made it 6 years of positivity, and surplus is a good thing. And when other communities might not be doing as well as we are, thanks for keeping our nose above water, especially through COVID. So Director Quinlan, thank you very much for keeping up the fantastic work that was before you, and I look forward to more years of it. And I think somebody with as much knowledge as the person that just spoke has should understand that taking a shot at staff through a telephone is not the right thing to do. And I don't want to use the word gutless, but I will. Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson.
Councillor Madigan. And then Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. And so I agree in part with Councillor Madigan in terms of the positivity, but sometimes it can be over positive. So in a small aspect, I agree somewhat with former Councillor Fryer in that when we're too conservative with the forecasting of those supplementaries, it makes it look at the end. I just think for the everyday taxpayer, it does not sit well to know that you paid that much more into a tax situation that might have been avoided. So I think we do need to be maybe less conservative with the estimation of those supplementaries, but I'm not the treasurer, so I won't make that final recommendation, but it is something going forward, because I know the 1 year we had a $2.35 million surplus, and I think that can be a bit offensive for taxpayers who during COVID are having a hard time paying all the bills to run their households. So from that perspective, I'm very understanding of it. But the other thing too is, and I know it's on that really long list of 400 things, was reviewing how the distribution of that surplus went, because I think I would much rather target within the assessment the amounts we need to when we have room to go towards different reserves as opposed to. So I think it's going to take a review of that process and where those reserves and where it's going to, because it does take the appearance that if we underestimate on the supplementaries and have an over surplus coming in, that basically we're padding it to supplement those reserves. So I think we have to avoid that message somehow going forward in our processes. So the other comment I wanted to make through to Treasurer Quinlan was our reference to the provincial funding and the restart. And in fact, there's much frustration at the federal level, the understanding that those are federal and provincial monies that are being managed by the province. So I think as a municipality who have gained great financial positions through those federal funds should acknowledge that. And I was thinking through you, Mayor Saunderson, moving forward as part of our financial report, I think it would be really important for council to have an understanding of how much comes into our budget from the federal government accumulated in a year, how much comes from the provincial government accumulated a year, and probably also the county in any of our major projects, such as the housing on 2nd and High. To have an understanding of how much those other orders of government are impacting our budget and our financial bottom line. Then my next question is for the 2021 information. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, Your Worship. What Councillor Jeffrey is saying is absolutely correct. I think, and in fact, I'm glad you brought it up, Councillor Jeffrey. We are talking about pulling together a much more robust list as part of our grant management process. So I think in the CAO's presentation of all the things that we're doing, that having sort of an indication of where those funds are coming from is definitely part of that list, and I think it's very important for sure. The second aspect on the surplus, I would agree that once we have a more, I suppose, updated asset management plan, that rather than maybe create those surpluses to create the reserves as we talked about, it makes sense to allocate them specifically. And I think as we get a more fulsome asset management plan, that will be in place and help us with that actual correspondence. So I think comments are very, very important for sure.
Follow-up, Councillor?
Mayor Saunderson, I appreciate the response.
And maybe just before we move on, I'll tug a thread that the councillor raised. And Treasurer Quinlan, maybe you can talk about how we budget for assessment growth. My understanding is it's a rolling 5-year average, and as well there's write-downs, although it didn't happen this past year. When other properties have a reduction, that goes into effect immediately. So there can be significant write-downs, which I know when we had a number of large industrial properties go offline, it reduced our assessment growth dramatically.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. You're absolutely right. The 4-year phase-in, as you mentioned, did not occur in 2020, and in fact, not for 2021 either. But basically, the growth comes through across a 4-year phase-in program. That was part of the actions that were put in place by MPAC back in 2009, when the original new current value assessment was started. The difficulty, as you mentioned, it does come in when write-offs or reductions in overall taxes occur right away or within that year, and in fact can be accumulated for over 3 years. So for example, if a request for reconsideration is applied to MPAC for a taxation year, generally it applies across 3 years, but the municipality sees the impact in the year that it occurs. So there's certainly some thought that we need to put in place in terms of both supplementaries and write-offs as we get closer to this year's budget.
Thank you. Councillor, any other questions or comments on this report? Seeing none, then I'll call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And that brings us to 7.5 T 2021-9 water and sewer arrears status and future actions. Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, I'm just going to highlight the key areas of the report. I think it's pretty comprehensive. I think, as we all know, water and wastewater bills are issued and managed by EPCOR for the town and have been for quite some time. Back in 2017, the OEB issued some regulations that no longer allowed disconnection of the hydro services between the months of November to April. Since that time, water and wastewater arrears have been climbing steadily. So back in November of 2019, the town began actions to assist EPCOR with the collection efforts to try and reduce this amount. So at that time, the outstanding arrears for water and wastewater were just about 130,000. So when those letters were issued, some concerns were raised about the town's approach and maybe more specifically on tenant occupied properties, as landlords lacked information or understanding that ultimately they could be held responsible for collection of those amounts. So I'm going to fast forward a few months, and so that was November 2019, and then 2020 happened, and the pandemic hit. So in March, as part of the town's actions to provide relief to both residents and businesses, a pause on the collections piece went in place. So I think throughout 2020, that pause continued, just as we all sort of went through the motions of the pandemic and tried to react to those things as appropriately as possible. So beginning in 2021, the arrears have grown at this point to just over 230,000. So staff have been working over the last several months to work with EPCOR to understand where those amounts are occurring, and also to come up with a plan to try and enforce and do the right things to start collecting these funds. So as of late, staff have proceeded in April. Arrears notices were issued specifically to property owners or properties that are occupied by landowners, where their arrears balance was greater than 200, with a request that payment be made by May 25th, or the amount of the arrears would be transferred to their tax roll. We did see some positive impact from that notice going out. However, we did proceed with tax rolling those amounts that were still outstanding as part of the 2021 final tax billing. In May, we issued arrears notices specifically to tenant occupied properties, again, requesting payment by June 25th, or the town would escalate procedures to collect that payment, which could include or result in a disconnection of the water services and notification to their landlords. I think the primary reason for this report is really just to communicate with members of council how staff would like to proceed, understanding that the bylaw in place has seen or has these actions within it. That being said, over the past year or so, the process to proceed or to move forward with disconnections has not been included. And I think, again, although staff would like to proceed with issuing those notices, it would only, the disconnection of the service would be sort of a last final effort after multiple notices and discussions, as well as the ability to enter into payment arrangements was included as well. So we certainly don't take that point of disconnection lightly, and we understand the impact that it has. I think in addition to this, there may be some situations where accounts will need to be written off, and that can be just moves and changes in ownership that have occurred in the past and prior to the notification that staff have proceeded with. So we'll be doing some additional analysis as part of that information. And of course, once we have that information, we'll bring it forward to members of council. Finally, I think it's just really important that staff work to continue to improve this collection process. We are definitely learning a lot and working through the bylaw and following what is in place today. But we are communicating with our partners at EPCOR much, I don't want to say much more, I guess a lot over the last several months to discuss what we can all do to try and make sure the collections are in place, and that our residents and homeowners understand just how important it is to pay those the water and wastewater bills, and that we are going to proceed with the actions that we have put in place in the bylaw. So I think that kind of sums up that report as well. So I'll pass it back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Treasurer Quinlan. Sarah, do we have anyone in our audience who would like to speak to this report?
Certainly, if there's anybody requesting to speak, either by telephone *9 or use the raise your hand feature. And no, there's not, Your Worship, at this time.
All right, then I'll read in the resolution and put it on the floor for council. That staff report T 2021-9 water and sewer arrears status and future actions be received for information. And that staff be directed to 1, follow bylaw number 2016-66 and commence actions to disconnect water service and tax roll outstanding water arrears. 2, undergo an initiative to improve the water billing and collection processes, which could include changes to internal procedures, bylaw number 2016-66 and the service level agreement with EPCOR. And 3, prepare an analysis of water and wastewater billing arrears in order to determine a path forward on collections of long-standing balances. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor Madigan. And I'll open the floor to comments from council, Councillor Jeffrey, and then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson, and through to Treasurer Quinlan. I was just curious as to why council would direct staff to follow a bylaw. I find the point of having a bylaw is that council to council, that, you know, it is a consistent application of our rules, and it takes consultation with the public to change the bylaw. So I was curious about your answer to that, and wondering if it was more a request to unpause the pause that we had done through the COVID thing. And also a comment that I really liked in the report to read about, also being able to take water service to a minimum service, similar to what we do with, or have the ability, or hydro has the ability to do with taking a household down to minimum service. So those were my questions, but I was really curious about why we would direct staff to follow a bylaw.
Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey. I think that is a good question. I guess it was more about communication and unpausing the pause, I suppose, hitting play again on that to that respect. With respect to reducing flows to an individual household, we have not done that in the past. We did speak to environmental services, and we would have to discuss that more to understand how that works and what types of things they'd need to put in place in order to do that. So unfortunately, I don't really have an answer for you right now, but we're certainly looking at that as a possibility as well.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. And I guess that I would just go to the clerk and ask for potentially another wording for an amendment in terms of really telling staff to follow a bylaw, if there's a better way to word that for the motion, or maybe there's not. But I just think it might be a bad habit to get into, being able to tell staff when or when not they're going to follow a bylaw.
Other comments?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship, to Councillor Jeffrey. A potential could be for that specific bullet, where instead of saying that staff be directed to, that council support staff in commencing actions to disconnect water services and tax roll outstanding water arrears.
Councillor Jeffrey?
Yeah, thank you, Clerk Almas. So I would like to make that amendment with respect to bullet 1, that council supports staff in proceeding to those actions with disconnecting the water service and tax roll outstanding water arrears.
Okay, I'm going to hold off on getting a seconder for that because we had Councillor Hamlin second, but I will come back to the Councillor Jeffrey.
Yes, I appreciate this report because it is a bit concerning to know that our arrears have doubled and are now over $200,000 just for these utilities. I had one specific question through you, Mayor Saunderson, to our treasurer. Am I reading this correctly? And it's under the analysis part of the report. This is page 238 of our agenda. But is it saying that our water bylaw requires or provides only property owners can apply for a water account, but we have been allowing tenants to sign up, so this has contributed to the problem? Am I reading that right? Thank you.
Treasurer Quinlan?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Hamlin. Our bylaw does state that property owners will have to apply to have a water account, and it does specifically state property owners. That being said, it's not unusual for a utility service to apply that application to tenants as well. However, I think what creates a complication a little bit is that property owners aren't necessarily aware of the fact that they can be held responsible for the outstanding arrears on a property if their tenant, so to speak, if we weren't able to collect. And part of what many municipalities do, and something that we're working with EPCOR to put into place, is actually create an application between the landlord, the tenant, and the town to say they understand that their tenant accounts are, even though they're managed by EPCOR, they are owed to the town, and because it's a town utility, can be added to tax rolls. That's part of the Municipal Act itself. Until we get that application in place, what we've done is provided letters educating property owners specific to this so that they understand their roles and responsibilities as well. And I think, as I mentioned in the report, that was part of the, I suppose, concern that was raised back after the November 2019 letter went through. So the next steps for us is, yes, the letter goes out so property owners understand it, but I really feel that an application that includes the information of the landlord, tenant, and the town is a more proactive approach. And we're going to be discussing with our partners at EPCOR somehow how we can put that into place.
Follow up, Councillor Hanlon.
Yes, thank you for that answer. And through Mr. Mayor, I am somewhat still concerned that we're not following the bylaw. Because I do, as I read the report, and I totally appreciate what the problem is, even if the landlord and tenants both make application to be on the account, how will the landlord collect from the tenant, and won't the arrears still end up on the property, roll? And also my supplementary question to that is, if they both make application, will the landlord then be entitled to notice of payments and arrears and to get statements? Thank you.
Treasurer Quinlan.
Worship, through you to Councillor Hamlin. Those are great questions. So I guess it's a bit of a two-part. So the application that I'm speaking about, in fact, that I have put in place in previous municipalities, is actually a form that is signed by all three parties that says, I understand that my tenant will receive the bill, and that there is a possibility that if the water arrears aren't managed, that in fact it could end up as a tax roll on my property. That essentially it's a risk. Now, what complicates that right now is the fact that we have outsourced this. Now, I'm not saying this would be, necessarily a reason to bring it in-house. I'm just providing it as it is a complication, because of course, EPCOR doesn't necessarily have the ability to know, the property owner's address or the property owner's information as the town does. So we really need to make sure that the two of us work together to put that into place. That being said as well, we are reviewing the bylaw, and I think the bylaw is definitely in need of a brush up or a refinement. So that would be extremely helpful as well. And when it comes to notification, and this is one area where the bylaw helps us a bit, is it does explain that upon notice of disconnection, that both the occupants and the landowners receive a notice explaining what the arrears are. So at that point, with the bylaw in place right now, it does say that's when we can allow the property owner to know what the amount outstanding is. Again, going back to if there was an application in place, we would clearly define to the tenant that should they decide to, that if the landlord was open to them to applying for this account, that the landlord would receive notification of arrears at the time arrears are in place. But I think the most important part is really that we put these processes in place, and that the follow-up and the start of the process that we've laid out here is followed as much as possible. So I'm trying to answer your question. There's a lot to it. So.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you for that answer. I realize, you inherited all of this, and thank you for looking through it all and figuring out where things are at, because it's certainly helpful for council. I'll just leave you with the thought that there may, it seems to me there's really good reasons to have only the property owner apply. Because I would expect that, and I don't know, this is a legal question to leave with you, but I would expect that most landlords would have the ability to collect from their tenant. So anyway, I'll just leave that with you. I think if only the property owner was getting the bills, we wouldn't end up with this problem. But I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any other questions or comments on this item? So that I will look to the amendment. Councillor Jeffrey put an amendment on the floor to change the wording, the first bullet, that says that council support staff in commencing actions to disconnect water service and tax roll outstanding water arrears. So I'll look for a seconder for that amendment, please. Councillor McLeod. Are there any questions or comments on that amendment before I call the vote? Seeing none, then I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Opposed? Duly noted. And before I call them vote on the main item, I just want to note and confirm, I know it's stated in the report, but certainly the actions to disconnect any water service would absolutely be the last resort after numerous attempts to notify both the property owner and the tenant and other steps. And I understand that recommendations with looking at the bylaw are also to address a number of the issues to avoid this type of situation where you're taking that drastic step. So that being said, then I will call the vote on the main motion. All in favor? I should say the main motion as amended. And all in favor? I don't think anyone's opposed. I think that was unanimous. Thank you. That brings us then to Treasurer Quinlan's final report of the night, 7.6 T 2021-10 2021 Q1 financial report. And I'll pass it back to you, Treasurer.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you. So I hope this will be the last time you have to hear my voice today, but I think one of the most important priorities for the Treasury Department this year is to communicate on ongoing updates of the financial position throughout 2021. It wasn't on accident that as the CAO brought forward our priorities and where we're at with priorities that we brought along the Q1 financial reporting as well, and we hope to do that going forward. So within the report, you see a schedule that I'm proposing as a go forward for Q2 and beyond. But I think it's important just to say that we do see how important and valuable it is. I think it's important that both staff and members of council have the information they need to make the most sound financial decisions that they can. As the town is proceeding through 2021, we continue to see the impacts and the long-lasting impacts of the pandemic. And of course, a continued stay-at-home order has been in place. Again, this has meant for us a lot of closures in our recreational facilities and limited hours at Town Hall. But I think, staff and members of council have, and I guess the word of 2021, pivoted to make sure that services haven't been overly impacted. And we've made the appropriate changes and decisions to move forward so that there doesn't need to be any additional requests in terms of funding. But we've also been, again, very fortunate to receive funding from the province and through the Safe Restart and as well as the feds. And we will use this to offset any additional impacts felt by the pandemic. I would say right now, where we're at, given the information that we have in 2021, of course, capital program hasn't moved quite yet in the first quarter. It's very rare that we move through the capital portion of it, but from an operational standpoint, things are chugging along as we would expect, or as we have budgeted. I don't see any unusual trends or causes for concerns at this point. And of course, if we do, we would bring a report forward to members of council at that time. Again, we will continue this type of reporting for each quarter as we move through 2021. And we will add a little section on our website to include these reports, so members of the public who aren't available at this SIC meeting or future SIC meetings can see the reports as they move forward. So I think that's all I really have to say. So I'll pass it back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Treasurer. I'll look to the clerk to see if there's anyone from the public that wants to comment on this item.
Yes, Your Worship. We have Mr. Fryer wishing to address the committee. So again, press *6 to unmute yourself.
Mr. Fryer, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I just start with saying that I prefer to be presenting to you in person, as I have in the past, with my usual own projections and open then for discussion with council. And of course, I do that all after discussing with staff. And I still try to do that, but it is a difficult situation in having to do these meetings virtually. So I just want to again say I appreciate the opportunity, Mayor Saunderson and council members. A major reason for the positive outlook I spoke about earlier in regards to Treasurer Quinlan's future forecasting and reporting is because of what has been provided with this Q1 financial report. Since I have lobbied for this, of course, it is great to see timely and detailed comparative variance reporting resurrected as it is outlined in the community-based strategic plan's financial goals. I would first propose that, especially in this case, one appropriate addition to the report's purpose is to also identify any financial benefits that could have a positive outcome. My reasoning that comes about here ties back to the note I made earlier about 2020's 36.3 or 5 million or 36.3 million in tax levy revenue. It also incorporates information provided in chart 2 or in the chart on page 2. Specifically, the taxation revenue line, it shows for 2020 the budgeted 35.6 million, and that 48% of it was billed at this time of the year for Q1. Since the actual is now known, I would suggest it would be better to show the actual amount in this column, which would result in the variance percentage of 46.8%. 2019 then would be 47.3%. I don't want to get into it in too much depth right now about this information, but it indicates that 2021's actual annual revenue is going to be much higher than the 36.8 million in the budget, perhaps even pushing towards 38 million. And I am well aware of the phase-in of the delay about the new impact amounts. If you recall, I presented to you on that. I don't believe, though, that indicates or is impacting the tax levy revenue. It does impact the allocation totals for taxes. But again, I can get into that in more detail. I think this forecast is great. It's great to have it and have it so soon in the year. And it offers up an opportunity for council, especially as you're moving forward to finalize 2021 tax rates. I will go through this in more detail in the near future and provide further input, but I appreciate the opportunity right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fryer. Sarah, do we have anyone else who would like to address this matter?
No, we don't, Your Worship.
All right, Council, if that's said, then I'll put it on the floor. It's a simple resolution and it reads as follows. That staff report T 2021-10 2021 Q1 financial report be received for information. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor Hamlin. Questions or comments, Council? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunders. At the risk of being voted off the island, just a quick one. In terms of the doubling of the one-time doubling of the gas tax fund for our budget and the Safe Restart monies for this, does the impact of those, do we save that for the end of the year, or do we attempt to bring those in the quarterly reports? I was just curious about that. Thank you.
Treasurer?
Through your worship, through you to Councillor Jeffrey, that's a great question. So the one-time doubling of the gas tax has not been included yet. We don't have, although we know the amount allocated, my understanding is that hasn't yet been fully passed, but we have already started to look at projects that could apply to that. I think one of the greatest things about the gas tax is that it's so versatile and flexible in terms of what types of projects it can apply to. So it will come forward at some point in the quarterly reports to explain, which projects we feel, or if it makes sense to apply it to a future project as well. With the Safe Restart funding, I have included the information within the dollars. So in your year-to-date actuals, the funding that we did receive back in March has been included. So it's based on the timing of the actual receipt of the funds, if that makes sense.
Follow up, Councillor Jeffrey?
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Council, any other questions or comments? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. I don't know if this is a question through you, Mr. Mayor, for Treasurer Quinlan, but here it is anyway. Under your capital funds requirements, one of the big items, of course, is the waterfront safety, which looks like it's around 11 million. And we spent, just eyeballing less than $500,000 so far. I know these are all ones our community are hoping we'll see sooner than later. Will these be items that are, we actually spend the 11 million this year?
Treasurer?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you, Councillor Hammond. I don't have the budget open here, so I'm just going to do that really quickly. But are you referring to something that's specifically in the 2021 capital budget?
Sorry, I should have been clearer. It's on page 4 of your report. And the little indented paragraphs at the front, at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth one down is waterfront safety.
Sorry, yeah, thank you. So the 7.8 million is budgeted for 2021. I suppose there's quite a bit of work that needs to go within that, but and I'd have to give you, I'd have to really look at it to see, if the plan is to move forward completely with that. But I assume because it was part of the 2021 budget that the expectation would be that yes, it would be included.
Okay, thank you. I'll just leave this, Mayor Saunderson, with a comment. I would love to hear from staff at a future SIC on whether these issues might come to fruition, or these projects might come to fruition this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Duly noted. Any other questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. I'm going to look to the clerk because we're at 7 minutes to 5, and the corporate and community services meeting, I think, is scheduled to start at 5. So I'm just going to look for some guidance from you, Sarah, on next steps. I'm not sure we have any updates, but there may be other business and we may have some public delegations. So how is best to handle this right now?
Certainly, Your Worship. I guess the question would be is how much of a break would members of council like in between the meetings? My preference would be to start not later than 5:20 on the corporate and community services meeting for the fact of quorum requirements for as identified in the procedural bylaw. We did not anticipate a conflict with this meeting, so it does indicate that it would start right at 5 o'clock and not following SIC. We do have a slide up right now on those wishing to participate on the Zoom meeting for corporate and community services, indicating that we will be starting later.
Okay, I'm going to suggest that we put a firm date of 10 after 5 at the latest. I think that's doable. And I'm going to look to Chair McLeod for her input.
Talk quick and make your bio break quick, and we'll start at 5:15 at the latest.
All right.
Hopefully.
That's we have our marching orders then. So we will continue on the plan that we will start the corporate community services at 5:15 p.m. So we will make that fit. So that is it for staff reports. Departmental updates. I don't think we have any, but I will just look to the CAO to confirm.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I don't believe that we have any departmental updates for this meeting right now.
All right, and that brings us to item 9 then, other business. Is there any other business? Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. I'm going to try to be as brief as I possibly can to adhere to Chair McLeod's direction and comments. So this is kind of like a half-hour's notice, so just bear with me, and if I do it wrong, then people can tell me that I did it wrong. Over the course of this term, we've had a number of changes regarding meeting dates, times, how far in advance regular and in-camera agendas come out, and how and when communication between council and staff should be done prior to a meeting, and more. Some of this has been captured in changes to our procedural bylaw, and some of it came simply out of emails as suggested best practices. As I fully support all of the recommendations from staff in this area, I am putting forward a notice of motion today that all of the individual items suggested that are not already in the procedural bylaw be officially added to it. And I'm happy to work with the clerk to have the exact wording appear on our next agenda. So if I did that wrong, I'm looking at our CAO's square, then I apologize. And I'm looking at the mayor's square. I apologize if I did that wrong. And I'll apologize to everybody else. And Sarah's got a deadpan face, so I don't think I did it wrong.
I think we've got the intent, and I will leave it to you and the clerk to finesse that into the appropriate wording for the next council meeting. With that work, Clerk Thomas.
Certainly, Councillor Madigan and I can polish off some appropriate wording, and if necessary, we can add the formal, wording of the notice of motion on the agenda for Friday, so the public and council have a heads up. And then, regardless, it will be included on the June 21st regular meeting of council.
Go ahead, Councillor Madigan.
Yeah, I would like it finessed and brought forward at Friday's meeting, so then everybody has enough time to do that. Please and thank you.
All right, so we will get that put together and out to council in advance of the special meeting, and it will be on the agenda for the special meeting, as I understand council's request. All right, thank you. Any other business today? Seeing none, then I will item 10. That brings us to item 10, public delegations. 5 minutes. Thomas, do you have anyone from our audience that would like to address council?
Thank you, Your Worship. We still have some attendees. So if anybody wishes to address the standing committee regarding strategic initiatives mandate items, please press the raise your hand feature or *9 if you're using a telephone. And it looks like there's no one wishing to address the committee at this time.
Thank you very much, Clerk. And now look for a motion to adjourn then, please. Councillor Jeffrey, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Council. Our committee, it was a productive meeting, and we will see the corporate and commercial services group back here in 17 minutes. Thank you.